morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where the Marvel Cinematic Universe continues to have a huge influence on Marvel Comics, as well as offer potential hints at what's in store for that Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now this week apparently has been a big press push from Marvel, not just with the Avengers 2 photos that we saw yesterday, but also for changes that are going on in the comics to their big three, but even more than that, which we'll get to in a moment, with Tony Stark, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. The new Marvel Trinity, if you will. That's a term a lot of people have been throwing around this week. They haven't in the past, but then, of course, the dominance of those characters in the Marvel Universe, because of their importance in the movies, is also kind of new. Of course, DC has long had a Trinity, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, and I think you're starting to see some similarities here with with Marvel's Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. And I think Thor obviously is taking over the Wonder Woman role. So it really leads to the question as to how long will this change be in effect. We all wonder what's going to happen to Chris Hemsworth's contract, but I guess this character isn't going away, so it's conceivable that Chris Hemsworth could stay in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but an actress could be brought on instead of, I guess, Carol Danvers, which so many of us have been hoping for, but there seem to be some other female characters in the mix as well, because not only was it announced about the changes for Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, but we have a very significant change to the lineup of the Avengers. So let's go with that first. Then I want to discuss the Captain America news, which really had a lot of traction yesterday because it's perhaps the most controversial. They're all controversial changes, but we talk a lot about whitewashing on this show, and while everybody defends whitewashing, not a lot of people seem to defend a black Captain America. And there are also other elements in play there in terms of Anthony Mackie, I guess, being probably slated to take on the mantle for some time on the big screen. But as I said, let's get to this lineup. Now, not only do you have your big three in the middle there, your Trinity, very obviously, and kind of the formation we're used to seeing Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman in, but then you have what looks like a coming attractions for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You've got the Scarlet Witch there in the costume that I think is a wonderful change for her on the page, and I wish that it was adopted in the movies. I much prefer this costume to what they have Elizabeth Olsen wearing, that kind of goth look, which seems so 90s to me. Then you have Captain America from the Winter Soldier sequel. You have the Winter Soldier, Bucky there, and he's in full Winter Soldier mode, looking quite like his movie counterpart, whereas the Bucky in the comics seems to have a little bit more of a costume change since then. Although the new Winter Soldier title, by the way, is quite good. I like it quite a bit. And that's kind of also been a regression of going back to his original persona when he was first introduced by Ed Brubaker in that Winter Soldier storyline. Then you see Angela, so I guess Lady Thor is not Angela. A lot of us thought that this new female Thor would be Angela with a dye job, but no, there they both are. You have two Asgardians on the Avengers, because of course it's being revealed that Angela is Thor and Loki's long-lost sister. Then I think fascinatingly you have Doctor Strange. We all know his movie is coming. I wouldn't be surprised with all these announcements ahead of Comic-Con if we got some major Doctor Strange announcements, maybe a casting announcement at the convention, because what are they saving, right? Then you have Ant-Man, of course. I think that's fascinating. Then you have Deathlock. That's a Deathlock down there. And there has been some talk about Deathlock maybe appearing, I think, in the Netflix television shows in some kind of capacity on TV. And then I'm not quite sure who that demon is, but I bet you he's going to be in the Doctor Strange movie along with Scarlet Witch, which is my wish list, as I talked about yesterday. But don't be surprised if that person's involved there. And then, of course, Medusa, the Inhuman Queen. That, as we've discussed many a time now, is who Marvel is trying to position to take over for the X-Men in their larger universe, because they don't have the film rights to the X-Men. So they're going to slowly phase out mutants or kind of put them in their own little universe and really bring up the Inhumans to be the ones that have all that power. The different power sets that are so much fun to watch. Very different social structure, though. Very different social dynamic to the Inhumans. They have a royal family. It's much more of a Game of Thrones with powers type of dynamic, which sounds pretty cool now that I say it out loud, now that I think of it, than the X-Men, which of course have always been, a stand-in for diversity, civil rights, and of course, schools, the schooling system, that kind of dynamic is what you've seen there. So I think that Inhumans are definitely on the horizon, and perhaps they said they experimented. A lot of you pointed out they did confirm that Wanda and Pietro are twins in that little after-credit scene in Captain America the Winter Soldier. So perhaps we're going to have a situation where they were exposed to Terrigen mists, or the cube, the cosmic cube. I think they might have been exposed to that. I'm not quite sure. I mean, Marvel needs to make that a little clearer, I think, in the films. But whatever they're exposing people to give them powers, I think that's what's going to lead to the Inhumans group of people that are going to have a lot of powers. And perhaps Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch are our first Inhumans. Inhumans, the title, by the way, I wish it would stick to its publishing schedule, because I'm sure it would be much more successful if it was coming out regularly. But Marvel is trying to push that in the page, because I think it's definitely a coming attraction for the big screen. All right, so let's talk about Sam Wilson as Captain America. As I said, I don't think there's been too loud of a backlash as there has in the past. A lot of people aren't even in favor of Miles Morales as Spider-Man, and I guess there are similarities between the two here, taking a popular character and having diversity by changing that mantle up and giving it to someone else to wear. I think for some reason it worked with Miles Morales because it's in a different universe, and that Peter Parker died. He's gone. Miles Morales took over. But I think having Chris Hemsworth waiting in the wings, Marvel can say all they want this isn't Lady Thor, but I think we all know that it is. And they can say all they want that Sam Wilson is the new Captain America, but I think we all know that, it's not going to be too long before Steve Rogers comes back in. Although some of you are pointing out that Chris Evans has made no secret of the fact that he doesn't want to stick with the Marvel movies long term. So maybe they are positioning Anthony Mackie to take over. And I think that Captain America has never been a huge character on the page, so it wouldn't really hurt the comics if they were to make that switch. And I think Anthony Mackie, by the way, did a phenomenal job in Captain America the Winter Soldier. If you had said to me before that movie they want to make Sam Wilson Captain America, I'd be like, really? The bird guy? Because he's, not gifted with a great uniform in the comics. But you see elements of that incorporated into his Captain America uniform, which I think also not great. I think having Captain America with a mask doesn't really work for the character, and I think it's better if he doesn't have one. A little more Top Gunny. By the way, I just watched the other day that Jimmy Kimmel segment here on YouTube where some kid does Marvel trivia. This little girl opposite, street performers who pose as Marvel superheroes on Hollywood Boulevard outside the theater where Jimmy Kimmel is filmed, and it was very charming and cute. I couldn't quite tell if it was fixed or not, but I'm going to just have faith and believe that little girl does know her comic book knowledge. But the reason I bring it up is they had a Captain America impersonator, and he was sporting the Ray-Bans, the Top Gun Ray-Bans, and I think it looked phenomenal and really worked for the character. And it made him a little cooler, and of course you're seeing him sans mask in all those Avengers 2 photos we looked at yesterday. But back to Anthony Mackie, I loved the way he not only played Sam Wilson, but I loved what Marvel did with the role of Sam Wilson. Instead of just being Captain America's diverse friend, he really represented what soldiers, veterans have become today. For a long time we all saw veterans as, grandfathers who fought in World War II. But I think that Sam Wilson, that character, did a great job, working at, with veterans who are being reinitiated back into civilian society. And I think, that whole element of the veterans today are, our peers. They're people of all ages, and they suffer from a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, and also lost limbs. Flak jackets save lives, but they don't save limbs. And I think that's definitely the way, something that's changing in terms of the military community, and also just the United States in general. For instance, I was in Universal Orlando recently for my vacation. I went to see the opening of the new Diagon Alley for Harry Potter. But one of the things I noticed while I was there, that unlike Disney World, Universal Studios acknowledged servicemen, former people who've served in the military, on their name badges. And so you were able to thank them for their service when you saw them. I thought that was really nice. Also, when I went on the Gringotts ride, Escape from Gringotts, they had a warning, not just, for the traditional, if you have back problems, vertigo, etc., but they said, oh, by the way, those of you with prosthetic limbs either have to have them removed or secured. And I thought it was fascinating and to some degree sad, but also, uplifting that so many lives have been saved and these people are back in society and can live their lives after serving their country. But that so many people had it at this point, and there were so many soldiers back in civilian life going to Universal Studios that it needed to be included in the warnings for the ride. So that's just, I think, a fascinating fascinating development that Hollywood should be aware of. They did a lot of work exploring, what happened post-Vietnam, what happened post-World War II. I think it's time to take a look at how our current conflict is reshaping our society yet again. So I think that Sam Wilson speaks to that, and because Captain America, of course, is in a time warp, he still has that 1940s World War II mentality that I'm talking about with the grandfathers, that typical, iconic image at this point of a grandfather standing up when called upon, to thank people who've served their country. That's from a bygone era, kind of like Steve Rogers. So I think Sam Wilson does a really good job. And also the military is, really a wonderfully diverse body. And also I've heard many people say it's a very open and, well-integrated community. And I've heard people say, I've heard stories of people saying one of the reasons I wanted to join the military is because there's really no racism there. Now I'm sure some of you will be able to think of some horrible stories that you're going to write in the comments, but I think overall it's a much more accepting group of people because everyone's risking their lives and everyone needs to have each other's back. Of course, bad things happen everywhere, but I think in terms of comparison to regular society, it's a little bit better in the military. At least maybe it was for some time. Maybe we're catching up. Hopefully. Wouldn't that be nice? But so I think that's why maybe Sam Wilson will work, but in particular Anthony Mackie. So I'm very curious to see if this progresses in that manner. Now, some of you have pointed out that Sam Wilson was Captain America before Bucky made it trendy. So I guess there is some precedence to draw upon, but I'll be very interested to see how people react to this character. In the past, people have been very upset about the idea of a black Captain America, but I think hopefully we're coming along, and there are so many great white characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I know Chris Evans does a great job, but if he doesn't want to play the role anymore, I'm okay. I don't want someone to be there who doesn't want to be there. I think that, Robert Downey Jr. is making a paycheck play, but I think Chris Evans maybe perhaps genuinely wants to go somewhere else. I've heard some bad stories about Chris Evans behind the scenes, as I recounted here before. But I would be very happy with Anthony Mackie. And although, what does this mean, though? Does this mean no Black Panther? Does this mean with the addition of Scarlet Witch and potentially Medusa, no Captain Marvel, no Carol Danvers? Are the characters some of us are very much looking forward to, are they definitely not in the near future because of these other changes? I think that's something else to take away from this and to question. So anyone going to San Diego Comic-Con, if you can brave the lines to be in Hall H for those Marvel Studios panel and maybe even the Marvel Comics panels, which are probably a little easier to get into, maybe you can ask those questions. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story, a lot of you have been saying, Grace, why don't you talk about Roberto Orci and him going over to the Power Rangers franchise? I don't think there's too much to say to that right now. I think Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman are not everyone's favorite people right now because of, a lot of the missteps they made for some very popular franchises. They, of course, really got a name for themselves off of the Star Trek semi-reboot, alternate timeline really in 2009. They became a hot commodity in Hollywood, but I think recently they upset a lot of people with Spider-Man 2, which they came on board to that franchise for the first time, and they're not going away, by the way. But I think people weren't happy with Spider-Man 2. And then, of course, Star Trek Into Darkness, they really dropped the ball on the franchise that initially made them. So it's all very discouraging. So I think Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman, as prolific as they still are, aren't quite the favorite sons that they once were. So we'll see what they do with Power Rangers. And it's very interesting to see all these properties like Power Rangers and Gem. Even though they're signing, name talent, experienced talent to these franchises, I think all of us question whether or not they can be made mainstream today. When you have darker stories being more popular, look what Warner Brothers is doing with their, or maybe eventually Fox is doing with the DC movies, and of course Legendary as a whole as a studio is very successful with this darker look. So going back to this Power Rangers, yeah, and Jim and the holograms, it just is like, really? We'll see. I guess Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles will be an excellent test case. So we'll see how that does at the box office. They're really starting, by the way, you might have noticed their advertising campaign push. I'm seeing a lot of posters around. I wonder if you are as well. And of course, the wonderful, actually one of you pointed this out to me on Facebook. I think it's Jason Phillips, I think that's the name. The wonderful epic rap battles between their season finale against the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles versus the Renaissance namesakes. Very funny stuff. You should go and check it out. So Roberto Orci, yes, he's on Power Rangers, but also the other story I wanted to discuss today is his former partner. They've split. Alex Kurtzman is going over to Universal to take over their Monsters franchise. Of course, Universal has a long history with classic monsters. They had the I think in some ways the first franchise ever a long time ago, with all the work that was done with Dracula, The Invisible Man, Frankenstein, really classic and well-respected films. Lon Chaney, of course, was there, Bela Lugosi, really, the history of filmmaking, and as I said, one of the earliest franchises in genre filmmaking. And of course, they reinvented a little bit with The Mummy, with, Rob Cohen. Was that Rob? I don't know if it was Rob Cohen. I think it might have been. But, of course, Brendan Fraser was the lead there. He did a wonderful... Oh, Stephen Sommers, that's who it was. That's my directors who made a big splash and aren't working anymore. Maybe they have lunch together because they have a lot of free time. Stephen Sommers did a great... I really liked the first two Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser. I think the third one went a little off base. And especially because they were like, Rachel Weisz, what? No, Maria Bello is the wife. And you're like, I'm not stupid, Universal. But they're like, you bought it for The Dark Knight, right? So, I don't know. That's a pet peeve of, replacing characters. Although, they did it also with Terrence Howard and Don Cheadle. So we'll see. I guess, contract negotiations are contract negotiations. I have a wonderful joke about that in the end credits of 22 Jump Street, by the way. So Alex Kurtzman's going over there. Universal wants to do this again, and they want to go, as I was saying, with the legendary direction, a much darker route. They took The Mummy in an Indiana Jones kind of route with Stephen Sommers and Brendan Fraser, but now they want to go a very dark route to kind of draw off of the successful horror genre these days. Kind of like what Marvel is even doing with their Doctor Strange film. I think. They haven't confirmed that, but that's my bet. Which would be so cool. A horror movie with the Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange and that fire guy, whatever. I think that's like, I forget the guy's name. He's like some demon who runs around and talks to Ghost Rider a lot lately. I forget who it is. I'm sure one of you will fill us in the comments down below. So they want to have a darker new reboot of these classics, and they have The Mummy slated for 2016, and then Kurtzman is also working on a new Van Helsing. You might recall Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing, which tried to be a new The Mummy, didn't quite work out. I'm very curious for this, and if they can make these really scary, horrifying films, I think they can do a really nice job with it. So we'll see. But again, I think there's not a lot of faith in Kurtzman or Orci after what happened with both The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Star Trek Into Darkness. Not a good year for them, recently. I guess when it's a year, not an official year, but a span of a year. All right, so let's go on to the third story. Talking about, damage control. Of course, you might recall Colin Firth said, I don't want to be Paddington Bear. My voice doesn't fit anymore. I've seen the film. It's delightful, but I don't want to be a part of it. And we're like, sure, Colin, it's delightful. You just don't want to be a part of it because you're just that great a guy. You're going to remove yourself from the film because you don't want to hurt it, right? Any further? I think that gave all of us a lot of cause for concern. But they found a new voice for Paddington Bear, and I think this is going to do a lot to, as I said, do damage control. Now, who is it? It's Ben Whishaw, most known to people as Q in the new Bond films, introduced, I think, in Skyfall. Really, he did a very nice job there. You might also remember him from Cloud Atlas. He's a very, interesting actor. I think he picks a lot of interesting roles, and he definitely has his fan base. And I have to say, seeing who they chose, I can kind of see why Colin Firth maybe honestly did feel he wasn't right for the role, because they're similar but yet very different. And I think Whishaw brings an energy and a youthfulness to the role that perhaps is necessary for what's being officially described as a very accident-prone young bear. Now, I don't know if that's the right direction to go with Paddington, and I had a lot of reservations about that new trailer that we saw. I thought it was a little bit too gross, and I still feel that a bear from Peru should have a Peruvian accent. But I guess that's just not classic Paddington Bear, because, of course, for so long in his animated series, which was quite charming, I don't know if you've ever seen it, he had a British voice. So we'll see. But, I think that as what we've said many a time now, as Hollywood becomes more global, choices like that seem a little bit more like to stick out like a sore thumb. So that's the third story of the day, and I'm curious to know if you guys think the casting of Ben Whishaw as Paddington's voice makes you any more likely to give the film a chance. I know I'm going to see it. I mean, I have such a strong history with Paddington Bear. I think we all do from our childhoods, that it's going to be hard for us to pass it by, unless it just looks absolutely abysmal. I'll be sure to let you know. All right, so let's go to the viewer question. This is from Yorn Patapelaho. I'm so sorry, Yorn. Yorn! Okay, it's very hard for me to sometimes pronounce names. We might be becoming a smaller global community, but I still have problems with pronunciation. So Yorn says, hey Grace, I have a question. I recently got back into reading comics, and I've been reading a lot of DC. I've heard you mention a couple of times you don't like the New 52, and I was wondering why. Thanks! Thank you, Jorn. Great question, and I think it kind of ties into what we're discussing today, which is one of the reasons I picked it. I talk about Marvel having a lot of changes based on the films, and that's a business decision rather than a decision made for creative reasons. And those are always very dangerous. Now, of course, the New 52 has been credited with single-handedly saving the comic book industry. Comic book sales were on a slump, but the New 52, because it said, hey, you don't have to have ever read a DC comic before to understand what's going on, come on over, that really did bring in a lot of new readers or had a lot of readers return, like Jorn. Look, Jorn got back into comics, and where did he go? He went to the New 52 because it promises no continuity weighing everything down. So that was a very enticing offer, and it did do a lot to boost sales. And people behind the scenes have said to me in the comic book world that DC saved comics, and that while people might have creative problems with it, business-wise, initially at least, it was a very smart and very strong decision. Now, back to that creative aspect, DC is certainly running into problems now. You're seeing a ton of cancellations. They have a big gap coming up where they, Bleeding Cool is calling it the DC Band-Aid, where they have to have a bunch of little mini titles to fill in while they try and fix things behind the scenes. The DC Renaissance, this New 52 Renaissance, just hasn't lasted. And that's because I think it never moved beyond a business decision. It's fine if something is initially a business decision, but you need to have the creative to back it up. It's kind of like what's going on with Hollywood right now, where they're like, nobody wants to watch our blockbusters. Damn you, video games and YouTube. Generational disconnect. And we're all like, actually, your blockbusters just aren't that good. So Hollywood can decide to only make blockbusters because they feel that they need to make it worth people's trip to the theaters with a bunch of special effects and spectacle, but they still can't abandon the script. People still want a good story deep down at the bottom line. And the same goes for comics. There might be no continuity weighing it down, but that doesn't matter if the actual story that's being told, the new story, isn't any good. My problem with the New 52, why I haven't read it, is because I take great insult in the fact that DC wiped away decades of fantastic storytelling. Frank Miller's Year One is one of the best comic books ever written. It's phenomenal. And with all due respect to Scott Snyder, who I really like a lot of his work, his 0 year or Year One, whatever he's doing now, just doesn't add up. I mean, I feel a lot of the stories that are being retold, like they retold Two-Face's origin story in a very gimmicky, unsatisfying way. And they do it, and not only do they have not, inferior stories, but they seem rushed to me. And I'm like, you know what? The story that originally existed that Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale did, I believe, in The Long Halloween, and those two, there was another one that they did. There was The Long Halloween, and they did something else. There were two back-to-back. I can't think of it off the top of my head. They're two very, very good trades at this point, which I highly recommend. And they did a lot to explore the background of Harvey Dent. And that took their time, and it was really sophisticated and wonderful. And then you get, 2 or 3 issues with some crazy Irish chick, who's a gang leader, killing Gilda, and you're like, what's happening? So I've just kind of been upset to see classic, wonderful stories that are iconic, in my opinion, erased for business reasons with stories that are just so inferior. And the fact that Frank Miller's Year One is no longer canon is just laughable to me. And I think that, I feel some of them are rushed. And then, as I said, I do like Scott Snyder quite a bit as a writer in a lot of areas, but I feel that his Batman has become a little bit too convoluted, a little too much going on. It's to lose the beautiful simplicity, the sophisticated simplicity of Frank Miller's Year One in favor of this is just like, well, they've thrown out the baby and the bathwater, and so I don't need to be there anymore. So that's why I don't like Year One. The New 52. I have a big problem with it, and I don't know what would get me back to DC Comics. I do read a few titles occasionally, or if something interests me, I still read Wonder Woman, Harley Quinn. If something has good art, I try to keep up with the Batman titles because I'm such a big Batman fan. I tried to get through the new Teen Titans, though, yesterday, and I actually stopped reading the comic halfway through because I just was like, and beautiful art from Kenneth Rockford, I think, but the script was just so weak and just so trying so hard to be cool. They were like, look at us use social media in a comic. Aren't we awesome? And I'm just like, this is just, it's unreadable. So I'm curious to what you guys think. Does anybody else have the same problems that I have with the New 52? And even if you don't, do you understand where I'm coming from? So thank you so much for your question, Jorn. And by the way, I don't want my problems with this to detract from your enjoyment of the New 52. This is only a personal opinion. And, DC Comics, it's not like no one's buying the New 52. And so you should I hope that you like my my response, but take it with a grain of salt, and don't let me spoil anything for you. But I would recommend that you go and check out some of those older stories just to see what they are, because they're fantastic. I mean, you might not feel it's worth your time because they're not canon anymore, but that's a shame right there. And that's what I'm talking about. All right, so thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Happy Friday. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered on Monday, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.